Welcome everyone to my channel. I am Martin. Now I will be your host in this video. In today's video, what I would like to do is show you guys the walker in a little bit more detail. Just say a little bit more about that walker build, what's next, some of the alternate history builds that I have in mind for the future. If you want to help support my channel and the work that I do here, I do use materials no matter what. I use electricity, I use a bunch of things. If you want to help support the channel, look into our Patreon, look into Wargames Vault. My magazine, Scratch Builder Monthly, has all of my tutorials, step by step. All of the things you see here in this video will be in June's issue, but there's also July, and there's like almost 3 years worth of the magazine at Wargames Vault. All right, you can also check the Patreon shop. And that's it. No more shameless self-promotion. Let's get to the workbench so that we can talk about these models. So here are examples of a variety of different builds. Some of these are older, much older, and these are constructed out of clothespins and even a little bit of tin from old tin cans. There's a variety of materials that go in this, but this was a point in time when I was experimenting with clothespins and little wooden beads and all that in order to make my walkers. Now, I mentioned these because they are going to become part of my little World War I alternate history stuff here, but also because the technique itself of using paperclip wire, this is where it was born, okay? And here's a little 15 millimeter British soldier from Peter Pig. This will be the main troop for these figures. I have a bunch of these, and so I will be painting these very soon. All right, so putting that aside, and now going to some of these vehicles, I actually modified some of these older vehicles. For this one, for example, I added this monitor-like turret, which is magnetized and gives it a more sort of primitive look to the vehicle. That was important because I was trying to achieve a certain look for these early walking vehicles, okay? So now, oh, and by the way, I do have artillery pieces, and I went back to some of my old construction methods using, clothespins, and this is the plastic anchor for screws. These tend to be really good building materials, and you'll see that in the magazine, the different uses that I have for those wall anchors these days. But going back to this build, and this is the newest build, let's go back. First things first, let's identify the materials that I used. That often will give ideas as to my thinking when it comes to scratch building. So a couple of the components to this model. This back tip here, which looks like a bug tip, and I wish I could get more of these. These are the tips that protect your wire cutters when you first buy them, and I saved it because I thought, this could be cool for the front of a starship or for an aircraft or something, a high-tech aircraft. And well, I ended up using it as the abdomen on a bug-like machine, but hey, whatever. So there's that. You also have sprues, these things here. If you see these things in the magazine, I show you how I glue them to the wire, and basically these sprues have the little knobby ends, and so I had to cut the sprues strategically so that they would kind of fit, those knobby ends would fit roughly where the joints of the vehicle's leg would be. That's what I mean when I say if you master making the legs, the rest of the machine is going to be very, very easy, because the hardest part of any walking vehicle is going to be the legs. The paper clips give it stability, give it strength, but the legs and making the legs look decent, that's the hardest part. I added here broomstick filament, okay? That's what that is. That's not wire. It's actually broomstick filament that I have. I use that for a lot of different things. Here are the anchors to screws. These are very useful, and I've been collecting them. Okay, been collecting them because I have a ton of these. And so some of these, obviously, I do use around the home. When I put up shelves and stuff. But the excess, the ones I don't use, end up in my projects. Okay, and it works really well. I think so. And then we have like little seed beads. Here is the cap, an old cap. And notice how I cut the little parts. And again, I show this in the magazine as well. But there's little rivets there. These things work like rivets. And so I cut them up and use them in various areas of the machine. Now, can I replicate something like this and make a second one? Yes, I can. I can actually do that. They will not be clones of each other, and that's okay because I don't like to have clones of my vehicles. They can be the same design with variation. There are many variants of a given vehicle model. I mean, Sherman's had many variants. Um, so I use that idea and I say, well, I don't really care for having clones, but as long as I can bring the vehicle, the second vehicle I made, to a very similar hull, as long as I have the parts I need, then that's great. Now, if I don't have a part like this, I add something else. I make a variant of the vehicle. Maybe it's an upgrade, in the design of the vehicle, right? The turret, same thing. I add a different turret, a different weapon. So while the rest of the vehicle is the same, there will be these sort of little variations, but the vehicle will still look like it's, it belongs together with its companion. So yes, I can replicate. I also work with templates on many things, so I can actually remake a lot of the parts that I need. This is a larger version of a Walker vehicle, and you guys have seen this before, and I have a second one that I also made. And this is a different scale entirely. This has moving parts. The howitzer goes up and down, and it has these turrets, you know. So this is constructed differently, but let me show you the legs. Now, this construction uses sticks, not paperclip wire. It also uses mesh. This construction relies very heavily on plastic mesh, and that's how I made the legs. So it's a slightly different build. But I like using the paperclip wire because the paperclip wire is very strong and very durable. Okay, here's another machine gun. It has machine guns on the sides. It has a machine gun in the rear here. I am going to put a machine gun down here or a flamer because these are called trench crawlers. These are things, or trench walkers. They cross trenches. That's what they're meant to do. Is they're meant to give support to the charging troops to get to the trenches as many troops alive as possible. Still a very difficult thing to do. So but anyway, that's sort of the narrative that I give it. So these things would come out and aid in taking over trenches. And that's why in these early stages, they are called trench crawlers or trench walkers. Now, I have a whole narrative as to how these things began, into their roles and all that stuff. As I build my figures, I like to add a little bit of narrative. So that's it. Now, what is the next step? Well, I'm going to show a different walker construction. You'll see that in July's issue of the magazine. And then the next step is to paint all of these little 15 millimeter figures that I have, both German and British. And I'll paint them in different colors to represent different nations if I want to, because I really have a lot of those British and I don't have a lot of Germans. So some of those British will end up being German. That's okay. I'll just paint them differently. And then we get on to the games. And that's ultimately what it's all about. It's about my games and some terrain along the way too. So these are the parts to an armored car. World War One cars were very strangely shaped, very boxy, right? People were just figuring these vehicles out. You can see the wording there. I made a mistake in the cutting of the shapes, but that's okay because I'll take care of that very shortly. But basically, I think geometry, I think how the different shapes are going to fit together in order to get an approximation of the vehicle that I want to build. Now, this is totally fictitious and in no way historically accurate, so I have leeway in how I build. This goes in the rear, seals the rear. This is the driver's cupola, and this is the little turret section. You'll see it in a minute. Now, I always try to think about the figures and the scale that approximates, the figure. So I think about, okay, these vehicles are very cramped, but can this figure sit, inside the driver's cupola? That kind of thing. So here is, a few minutes later, the armored truck hull. And this still needs the wheel assembly, of course. Have to design the wheel assembly. But you can see the boxiness, the weirdness, right? There is a little, like, equipment bay here. A little flatbed. And then notice how I use mesh for the side windows on the doors. And also for the front viewing of the vehicle. I add these little things here as air vents. These are little bits of cable ties, which I always save. They're excellent for this kind of detail. And then, of course, I like adding details like hatches. In this case, this is a hatch to the engine. And I love adding details like that because it really... taking the time to do that really adds to the model. And the whole thing is very, strange looking, a little bit asymmetrical even. And that's okay. That builds into this whole idea that people in this fictitious story or universe are still figuring out these technologies. These technologies still have a function. They have to stand the test of battle, but they're still figuring things out. And so that's the narrative that I use when building and taking into account these little imperfections. And there is a very imperfect kind of feel to the build. And it works right into this early narrative, right? A narrative of like early or alternate history, early 1900s, that kind of thing. I will be adding a turret to this, a very flat turret with a machine gun. And then once we add the wheel assembly and the mud guards, we have ourselves a little armored truck. And I like the way it came out. As a case in point to the narrative, here is, an early walker quadruped, spider-like. And then we have, as the war progresses, the Great War. We're talking World War I alternate history here. As the Great War is coming to an end, these walkers, still quadrupeds, still very large, sort of cylindrical turrets, but they are downgrading in size. They're becoming smaller with improved power plants. And that's due to the fact that aircraft are beginning to take hold. Biplanes. Once aircraft begin to take hold, that becomes a big threat to the walker. So they become smaller in size to attempt to hide the machines. Also, the addition of anti-aircraft weapons, all that stuff has to take place. And then we get to a World War II kind of walker, maybe mid-war or even late war, where we get a more modern chicken walker type of machine. Still imperfect, still prone to breakdowns, but definitely a different power plant, definitely a lot smaller than when they started, and used in infantry support and all that. Also probably a one-manned or, a one-manned vehicle. So the technology is kind of, improving. Same thing with these armored trucks and cars. Here we see a more like World War II style of vehicle, fictitious, of course, not historically accurate, but it becomes a little more modern looking, a little flatter, more angular in its design, and then the older, very boxy machine. And yes, I did add the turret to the top there. Now I have ways of adding details to these armored trucks and cars. Details like little headlights, I can add those. And also I do seal a few of the areas that need a little bit more sealing. There are a number of caulks that can be used for that aspect. But even white glue, white tacky glue is amazing for filling some of these really small areas, gaps and things in the construction. So I use tacky glue a lot, and it works very well for me. And I may have to use 1 or 2 layers with an applicator on the vehicle, and that's fine. This, someone put it very nicely in a comment. This like earmarks these kinds of games and themes, these alternate history things where you have like an alternate industrial revolution and you get all these walkers and all these things. They earmark sort of this unexplored timeline in human history. And that's sort of how they phrase the comment. And I thought that was a very interesting comment, a very good way of putting it. I think that's what attracts me so much about this theme, is that sort of alternate industrial revolution, that what if these things were real, right? We know they weren't, but what if, right? And so it also kind of plays into the whole idea of you have futuristic mechs with all this high-tech stuff, and then you have the very beginnings of these like walking machines. Where did those high-tech mechs come from? There had to be some kind of evolution. And I think that this is a great way to represent that evolution. So again, this is working narrative and storytelling into my builds. That's all. Obviously in war games, this is something I think would fit more in an RPG, the storytelling power of an RPG rather than a miniature war game. But it's kind of nice to have this kind of fluff in mind as I'm building, right? The other thing is to add details like hatches, even if I paint them. Ask myself questions like, all right, if this walker's on fire, now what? How is this crew going to escape, right? What happens? How do crew get up the walker? I mean, these are really big walkers, as you could see from the model. So I thought about an idea where I would add little details, or simply just state it, that on the legs themselves, there's little handlebars and pegs and things where people actually scramble up the legs of the walker, right? Kind of like what they did with sailing vessels and rat crawls. And you see people, scrambling up the rat crawls to get to the sails. Kind of the same idea, but using the legs. Also, I do add little details like ladders, right? But thinking about the hatches and adding hatches, even if you paint them and you don't add them three-dimensionally, really, really helps the model. I think it helps bring that suspension of disbelief, because you're thinking of ways in which people use the vehicle, right? How are they going to get out? How are they going to get in? How are they going to access machinery when the vehicle breaks down? So those are kinds of little things that I think about in all my builds, really. All right, folks, thank you very much. I don't want this video to get too long. I've blabbered enough. If you want to help support the channel, like I said earlier, visit the Patreon, check out Wargames Vault, but also become a subscriber to the channel. You'll get updates and things like that. I am working on new games for the channel. Unfortunately, it's gotten cold again, and it's in like low 40s. It's crazy. Usually this time of year, we're closer to like upper 70s, 80s. Not this year. So my studio, I can't work. I have the table set up there for a 1-hour war game, alternate history. Can't do it. So we're going to have to wait till next week. I thank you for your patience, and then we'll have, as the summer progresses, hopefully summer progresses, we'll have a couple of games coming to the channel as well. We'll have some one-shot games where we explore all of these scratch builds, okay? So thank you very much, and I'll talk to you in the next video. Thank you for your support. I appreciate it.